The brakes screamed as the 18-wheeler skidded to a halt. In the middle of a blizzard-whipped highway, something small, something trembling, was moving in the snow. Two golden puppies, barely a month old, were tangled in barbed wire, their tiny whimpers lost beneath the roar of the wind. Behind the wheel was a man who had nothing left to lose. But in that moment, under a frozen sky, he found two reasons to believe again. What happened next will break your heart. And then stitch it back together with hope. The snow fell like ash from a sky in mourning, covering the stretch of Highway 61 near the Minnesota border with an unforgiving sheet of white. Trees stood like silent witnesses on either side, limbs bowed beneath the weight of winter's grief. No other lights, no other sounds, just the quiet hum of an 18-wheeler slicing through the storm. Behind the wheel sat Harlan Boone, 52 years old, a man who once loved the open road, but now drove only to outrun the echo of his own silence. He was thick-set, not with fat, but with the kind of solid, tired muscle that came from years of labor. His face, weathered like the roads he drove, was framed by a beard the color of iron frost. He wore a flannel shirt over a thermal long sleeve, and jeans that had faded from navy to ghost blue. A year ago, he had a family, a home in Duluth, a wife who once laughed when he danced in the kitchen, a daughter named Emmy, whose drawings still hung on the visor above his head. Now, those memories lived only in the glove compartment, buried beside the divorce papers and the letter from the court that had taken custody of his little girl away. He hadn't cried in 6 years, until tonight. The wipers swiped across the windshield, smearing slush. The radio crackled, a half-forgotten country song swallowed by static. Then, a shape. It darted across the edge of his vision, small, low, moving wrong. Harlan hit the brakes. The truck let out a mechanical scream as the wheels locked, fishtailing slightly before grinding to a reluctant stop. The world lurched forward, then fell still again. Harlan's knuckles stayed white on the wheel for a second longer before he reached for his flashlight, cursed softly, and shoved open the cab door. The wind hit him like a slap, bitter and immediate. He stepped onto the snow-packed shoulder, boots sinking a few inches. The beam of the flashlight cut through the curtain of falling snow, dancing along the roadside brush. Something moved, twitched, really, at the base of a small embankment. He staggered forward, heart thudding. Not with fear, but with some deeper dread that hadn't fully surfaced yet. And then he saw them. Two puppies, golden retrievers, no older than a month. They were tangled together in a cruel nest of rusted barbed wire, matted fur clotted with blood and snow. One was whimpering, a fragile, breathy sound barely audible over the storm. The other wasn't moving at all. Harlan dropped to his knees. "No, no, no," he muttered, voice catching in the cold. He reached out, hands shaking as he tried to part the wires without causing more harm. The snow around them had been trampled. A sign of a vehicle? Footsteps? It was hard to say, but one thing was clear. This wasn't an accident. The barbed wire had been wrapped, deliberately. His flashlight fell, tumbling sideways into the snow. He worked by instinct now, pulled out his pocket knife, began sawing slowly, carefully, through the thickest coils. Blood streaked his knuckles. He didn't stop. The first pup, a male, let out a cry as Harlan freed its back leg. Its eyes opened. A golden brown, too bright for this cruel world. The second pup didn't stir. Harlan swallowed a tremor in his chest and reached for her, hands gentle, whispering things he hadn't said aloud in years. "I got you, baby girl. You hold on. Just hold on." He lifted both of them into his arms, nothing but bones and fur and faint, flickering warmth, and turned back toward the truck, the snow pelting his face like needles. Inside the cab, the heater blew full blast. Harlan wrapped the pups in his spare hoodie and set them gently on the passenger seat. The male moved. The female was still limp, her breath too shallow to count. He stared at them for a long time. All the broken things in him seemed to recognize something in their small, silent suffering. Something done to them, on purpose. And like a mirror held up too close, it reflected everything back at him. The betrayal, the abandonment, the cold courtrooms and colder mornings, waking up without Emmy's voice in the kitchen. Something cracked inside his chest, his throat clenched, and for the first time in years, Harlan Boone wept. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a steady, impossible unraveling. Tears ran down through the cracks in his face, catching in the corners of his beard. His shoulders trembled. He didn't try to stop them. The road had always been his escape, but tonight it had delivered him two lives even more lost than his own. He reached over and gently stroked the boy pup's muzzle. "You're tougher than you look, huh?" The pup opened one eye, licked Harlan's finger once. "Yeah," Harlan whispered, voice catching. "You'll be okay." He looked at the girl again. Her chest rose once, shallow, then again. He took a long breath and leaned back in the seat. They needed warmth, food, help. But for now, they had him, and that would have to be enough. The truck idled, casting a faint golden glow against the swirling snow. And on that empty stretch of highway near the border, where even God seemed to hold his breath, three hearts beat quietly together. One of them, for the first time in a very long while, had something to beat for. The cab of the truck groaned gently beneath the weight of the wind outside. Snow tapped against the windshield like 1,000 quiet fingers trying to get in. Harlan Boone sat motionless behind the wheel, wrapped in layers of flannel and silence, eyes flickering between the two fragile lives resting beside him on the passenger seat. The boy pup, slightly larger and stronger, had curled into the folds of an old wool jacket Harlan had balled up as makeshift bedding. His fur, now half dried, still clung to patches of dried blood. One hind leg twitched occasionally, but he made no sound. His amber eyes blinked slowly, watching Harlan with the hesitant trust of something that had known too much pain for too little time on this earth. The girl lay still. She was barely breathing. Her golden coat dulled by dirt and rust, matted in places where the barbed wire had bitten into her side. The bandage, ripped from Harlan's last clean t-shirt, was already soaked through with blood. He had tried to tie it tight, but not too tight. Pressure, but not strangulation. That's what he remembered from some first aid course 20 years back, taught by a man with a cigar in his mouth and zero patience for people who couldn't handle a little blood. But this was different. This wasn't a classroom. This was real, raw, alive, and dying right next to him. He reached out and placed a heavy hand against her chest, just lightly enough not to crush her, but firmly enough to feel for the rhythm. It was there, barely, a breath, then another, then silence that stretched too long. He leaned closer, holding his own breath. A twitch, the smallest lift of her ribs, weak but present. Harlan exhaled, his throat catching. He hadn't cried again, not since earlier, but his eyes still stung with the weight of holding back. The heater rattled behind the dashboard, pumping hot air that did little to cut through the cold inside him. Outside, the storm had slowed, but visibility remained poor. The road ahead was a long stretch of pale desolation, broken only by mile markers and the occasional flicker of reflective paint from worn road signs. He reached for the old glove compartment and dug around until his fingers brushed a creased map. GPS rarely worked in this stretch of northern Minnesota. Too many trees, too much snow, too far from the world. He unfolded it on his lap, tracing the route with a shaking finger. Fernbrook. The name had been on a faded sign a ways back, wedged between warnings of ice and deer crossings. The town wasn't on every map, just the old ones, the kind people used before satellites made everyone believe they could never get lost. According to this, it was at least 100 miles south, maybe more. He looked back at the pups. 100 miles, he whispered. You two think you got it in you? They didn't answer. The boy shifted, stretching his paw out toward his sister. It landed gently across her back. Harlan blinked. That small gesture was the loudest thing he'd seen all night. He turned the key. The truck rumbled back to life. He pulled back onto the road slowly, tires spinning once before gripping. The headlights cut a golden swath through the falling snow. The storm was tapering, but the night remained brutal. Wind still tugging at the sides of the trailer, roads still slick with black ice in patches he couldn't see. But he drove anyway, because stopping was no longer an option. He kept one hand on the wheel, the other near the passenger seat, fingers grazing the boy's fur now and then, as if that might somehow anchor them all to this world. Each time the girl pup wheezed or jerked, his heart jumped. Once, when she went still for nearly a full minute, he almost pulled over again. But then came a breath, a shallow, shuddering gasp that sounded like hope trying not to die. He drove faster. The white line blurred. The highway stretched out like a corridor through the end of the world. And his mind wandered. Not to Emmy this time, or his ex-wife, or the long, drawn-out silence of motel rooms, but further back. To a place he rarely let himself remember. Summer, age 9, a pond in the woods behind his uncle's property, and Buck. Buck was a mutt, a shepherd mix with lopsided ears and a bark too big for his frame. He had followed Harlan everywhere, slept on his dirty clothes, barked at anything that moved. That day, Harlan had fallen through the ice-crusted pond edge in late spring. His cousin had run for help. Buck had jumped in, dragged him by the collar, saved his life. Buck had been hit by a tractor 3 years later, died in Harlan's arms. The last thing his father had said before burying the dog was, "If something loves you enough to pull you out of freezing water, don't ever forget it." He never had. Not really. And tonight, the ghosts of that memory, of Buck, of childhood, of someone worth saving, clung to the back of his throat. He leaned forward in the seat, peering through the windshield. Nothing but white. Then, up ahead, a dark form. He slowed. A deer, motionless in the middle of the road, antlers sharp as tree branches, eyes reflecting back in cold yellow. Harlan swerved gently. The truck eased around it. The deer never moved, like the whole world was watching him tonight, holding its breath. He pressed on. The fuel gauge dipped. His hands ached. The girl pup coughed, a wet, rattling sound, and then lay still again. Harlan gritted his teeth. "Hold on," he said, more to himself than to her. "Just hold on." There were no stars in the sky, only clouds, only cold. But somewhere beyond that, he imagined a light waiting, and for the first time in a long while, he was driving toward it. The town of Fernbrook appeared like a whisper between the folds of falling snow. Its old brick buildings hunched close together as though shielding each other from the cold. Harlan's truck crawled into the narrow main street just past 3 in the morning. The engine was running low on both fuel and faith, but it hadn't quit yet. Neither had he. Streetlights flickered dimly overhead, casting pools of light on the icy road. The world here moved slow, and tonight, it didn't seem to be moving at all. A wooden sign at the edge of the town read, "Population 2,406, though Harlan doubted many were awake to greet him. His eyes scanned the storefronts, diners closed for the night, a barber shop with scissors painted on the window, a feed store with snow stacked high against the door. Then, finally, a sign carved in old wood with hand-painted lettering, Moriarty Veterinary and Emergency Animal Care, open 24 hours, ring bell. The building was modest, red brick, chipped white trim, a single outdoor light over the door. A Christmas wreath still hung on the window, though it was well into January. Harlan parked diagonally, not bothering with proper lines. The pups were barely breathing now, curled like question marks in the passenger seat. He gathered them into his arms, coat already damp with melted snow and old blood, and staggered up the steps. He rang the bell. No response. He rang again. Then a third time, a shuffle behind the frosted glass. The door opened slowly, and Lena Moriarty stepped into the threshold. Tall, lean, wrapped in a navy wool sweater beneath a lab coat. She looked like someone who drank black coffee at all hours and remembered everything. Her dark auburn hair was pulled into a practical braid that ran down the back of her neck, and her face, though young, carried the quiet fatigue of someone who had stayed up too many nights for creatures that couldn't say thank you. She wasn't what Harlan expected, too calm, too steady. Her eyes moved instantly to the bundle in his arms. "Inside," she said, voice low and firm. The warmth of the clinic hit him like a second impact. It smelled of antiseptic, fur, and something sweet, like chamomile. Lena moved quickly, guiding him into a room that looked like a small operating bay, clean, efficient, lined with metal tables, cabinets, medical charts. A ginger tabby cat sat curled in the corner on a heating pad, one ear missing, watching them both with suspicion. "Put them down," Lena instructed, pointing to the padded table. Harlan did. The girl pup wheezed. Lena's expression didn't change, but her movements quickened. She pulled gloves over her slender hands, reached for scissors, and began cutting away the bloodied cloth. A pale blue vein in her temple pulsed slightly as she worked. "Where did you find them?" she asked without looking up. "Highway 61, Barbed wire, Harlan replied. Deliberate? Look that way. She didn't speak again for several minutes, just moved like she'd done this too many times before. She placed an oxygen mask over the weaker pup's snout, started disinfecting the wound on her thigh. Harlan hovered near the door, feeling useless, clenching and unclenching his fists. A boy entered, late teens, maybe early 20s, with shaggy hair and earbuds hanging around his neck. His name tag read Mason. He looked half asleep but snapped to attention when Lena gestured to him. Warm fluids, saline IV, antibiotics. We need to flush that wound now. This one's septic. Mason nodded and moved fast. Clearly not his first rodeo. Harlan stepped forward. Is she going to make it? Lena finally looked at him. The silence between them tightened. The male's stable, some minor trauma, maybe a concussion. He'll be okay. She turned back to the girl pup. Her leg's in bad shape. She's in shock. And I'm guessing this injury is more than 24 hours old. If the tissue's necrotic... She didn't finish. Harlan stepped back, a sudden tightness rising in his throat. The fluorescent light above flickered once. I didn't know where else to go, he said quietly. You came to the right place, Lena said, not unkindly. Mason moved around them with practiced efficiency. He placed a heating blanket beneath the girl pup and adjusted the drip. Lena leaned in closer, her brow creased as she examined the leg again. She's fighting, Lena muttered, but she's on the edge. What happens if the tissue's dead? Then we amputate. The word hit Harlan harder than expected. He glanced at the little pup, tiny chest rising, falling, barely. So small, so unfair. He swallowed hard. Do whatever it takes. They worked in near silence for the next hour. Harlan didn't sit, didn't pace, just stood rooted near the doorway, arms crossed over his chest, like holding himself together was an act of will. The ginger tabby blinked at him now and then, unimpressed. When Lena finally stepped away from the table, she pulled her gloves off and tossed them into the bin. She's stable for now, she said, but we'll know more by morning. Harlan exhaled. Thank you. You're lucky you got here when you did. Doesn't feel lucky. Lena studied him for a moment, as if searching for something in his posture, his voice, the way he didn't quite meet her eyes. You drive long haul? She asked. He nodded. Mostly lumber, Midwest runs. You live out of your cab? I do. She crossed her arms. Most people wouldn't stop for something like this, let alone drive through a storm to save it. He didn't answer. Mason returned and handed Lena a folder. She flipped it open, frowned. These dogs, she said slowly, they look familiar. I saw photos like this a few weeks back. Someone flagged a breeder listing in a private vet group I'm in. Golden pups, malnourished. One had a scar near the flank, like this boy here. She motioned to the pup now sleeping on the heated pad. Illegal breeder? Worse, she said. Dog laundering. They pump out litters, claim their rescues, sell them for cash under fake names, then dump the unsold ones when they get too sick to pass off as adoptable. Harlan felt something dark stir inside him. They left them to die, he said. Lena nodded, quiet. And they almost did. He turned to the girl. She was asleep, legs tucked under her, bandages clean, breathing steadier. But she was not out of danger. There's a cot in the back, Lena said gently. If you want to stay, I'll stay in the truck. Keep the engine warm. She didn't argue. He walked back into the cold, breath rising like smoke in the frozen air. The town was still asleep, the snow beginning to ease. He sat in the driver's seat but didn't start the engine, just stared ahead at the nothing. A long silence, then the faintest sound behind him, a soft paw against the window. The boy pup had crawled over from the seat, pressing his head to the glass, watching. Still watching. Still waiting, still fighting. Harlan closed his eyes, laid a hand against the glass from his side, and for the first time in a long while, prayed not for himself, but for something small and golden and barely alive. He didn't know what morning would bring, but for now, hope was enough. Morning came softly, carried in on a pale lavender light that spread across the snow-covered rooftops of Fernbrook like an apology. The storm had passed. The air was still sharp, but the sky had cleared, revealing the soft promise of a sun that had forgotten how to shine. Inside the warmth of the small veterinary clinic, the world stirred slowly back to life. Harlan Boone sat on a bench in the corner of the recovery room, his eyes fixed on the two tiny figures sleeping on the heating pad. The boy pup lay curled, his body rising and falling in the gentle rhythm of deep sleep. The girl, smaller, frailer, her leg wrapped in fresh gauze, was resting too, her breathing shallow but steady. She had made it through the night, barely. And yet somehow, that barely felt like a victory worth whispering thanks for. Harlan hadn't left the clinic since arriving. He hadn't slept either. He'd sat, motionless, staring, thinking, holding the silence like it was something sacred. He didn't dare ask too many questions, didn't want to jinx whatever miracle had stitched itself into the bones of the small broken creature who now had a second chance at life. Lena Moriarty entered quietly, her footsteps soft across the linoleum. She wore faded jeans and a gray hoodie beneath her lab coat, her hair still damp from a rushed morning shower. A pen was tucked behind one ear, and a steaming mug of black coffee rested in her hand. "You didn't sleep," she said without looking at him. "No," Harlan replied, voice low and dry. "Didn't want to." She nodded and set the mug on the side table next to him. "Coffee, extra strong." He murmured a thank you and took a sip, letting the bitterness wake him further. Lena leaned over the recovery table, checking the IV lines, brushing her fingers along the edges of the pup's bandages. "She's doing better than I expected," she said. "The antibiotics kicked in fast. We'll still have to monitor for infection, but the tissue around the wound is pink again. That's good." "She'll keep the leg?" Lena straightened and looked at him. Her voice was quiet. "Yes. If nothing changes in the next 48 hours, she'll keep it." Harlan let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Relief didn't rush in all at once. It came in slow waves, like the thaw of winter. He looked down at the pups again. "They need names," he said softly. Lena tilted her head. "They do." He stared for a moment, then reached out and gently stroked the boy pup's ear. "This one, the bigger one. I keep thinking of ashes, of things burned down to their bones. He's tough, but there's something hollow in him, like he's already seen too much." Harlan paused. "Ash. I'll call him Ash." Lena watched him, her eyes unreadable. "And the girl?" He turned toward her, so small, so fragile, but still here, still breathing. She fought when she shouldn't have been able to. She held on. That kind of hope, he smiled faintly. Clover. For luck. "Clover," Lena repeated. "It suits her." A silence settled between them, not awkward, but reflective, like the space left behind after a prayer. Harlan sipped his coffee, now lukewarm, but welcome. He glanced sideways at Lena, then back to the pups. "You've done a lot," he said, "more than most would." Lena shrugged. "They needed help. Still, you didn't have to." She took the stool beside him and sat, elbows on her knees. Her hands were small but steady, nails clipped short, skin dry from too many days of scrubbing and soap. She didn't look tired so much as worn, a woman built to endure. "My father was a medic," she said, eyes on the floor. "Military, Afghanistan. I used to wait by the door for him when I was a kid. He came back in pieces, inside and out." Harlan didn't speak. He knew that kind of return. "One day he just didn't come back at all, and my mom, she couldn't handle it, left not long after. I ended up with an aunt who didn't want kids but did her best anyway." Lena shrugged again, as if dismissing the story's weight. Animals were the only thing that made sense. They don't lie to you. Don't leave because it's too hard. "Yeah," Harlan said quietly. "I know what you mean." The tabby cat from before, still watching them from the counter, let out a quiet meow, as if offering its opinion on the matter. Harlan looked over. "What's his name?" "Her name's Bishop," Lena replied. "She lost her ear to a dog fight 3 years ago. Doesn't trust many people. Thinks she owns the clinic." "She's probably right." Lena almost smiled. The morning passed in slow hours. Ash woke briefly and drank a little warm broth from a shallow dish. Clover remained sleeping, twitching slightly in her dreams. Harlan helped Lena clean out one of the storage closets, repaired a broken hinge on the front door with tools from his truck, and even offered to shovel the walkway. "Most truckers don't hang around," Lena said as she handed him the snow shovel. "Most truckers don't name dogs they just met," he replied. She said nothing, but when he glanced over his shoulder, he thought he saw the corner of her mouth twitch upward. That afternoon, Lena took a few calls from local farmers, rescheduled non-urgent checkups. She made it clear she was staying close to the clinic for at least 2 more nights, just in case Clover's condition changed. Harlan didn't argue. He slept in the cab of his truck again that night, curled beneath 2 blankets, a small propane heater running at his feet. He kept the windows cracked and left the radio off. It was the quiet he needed most. In the early hours before dawn, a soft tapping woke him. Ash. The pup had wobbled his way up onto the dashboard and was pressing his paw to the glass again, the same way he had the first night. Harlan smiled and reached out, pressing his hand to the other side of the window. "You and me," he whispered. "Guess we're not so alone anymore." The town of Fernbrook lay still around him, blanketed in soft snow, the street lamps casting warm halos in the dark. And inside the small clinic at the end of Main Street, a girl named Clover was still breathing, still fighting, still here. The road stretched out in front of him like a ribbon of second chances, framed by frozen pines and the echo of tires humming low against cracked asphalt. Snow still clung to the shoulders of the highway in clumps, but the worst of winter had passed. Or so Harlan told himself as he gripped the wheel and glanced at the mirror where 2 soft golden heads bobbed with each bump in the road. Ash and Clover had claimed the back seat of the cab as their domain. Ash sat upright, ears perked, eyes alert, his body already beginning to fill out with strength. Clover rested against a worn cushion, her legs still wrapped, her movements slower but more confident each day. A tiny stuffed raccoon dangled from her mouth, a gift from Lena before they left Fernbrook. It had taken 3 days of rest, a final checkup, and a promise to stay in touch before Harlan pulled out of the town that had briefly felt like something he hadn't had in years. Home. Now they were heading south on Route 52, hauling an empty flatbed bound for Iowa, the first of a few odd jobs Harlan had picked up from old contacts. But it wasn't the lumber that kept him going. It was something else, something warmer. The truck rolled through long miles of nothing, and in those long silences, Harlan started speaking again. Not to people, but to the dogs. He didn't expect responses, but Ash listened like a therapist, and Clover blinked slowly, ears flicking at the rise and fall of his voice. At rest stops, Harlan would set up makeshift training sessions behind the truck, his boots crunching over gravel as he coaxed them into simple commands. Sit, stay, come. Ash learned fast, responding to voice and hand signals with a sharpness that reminded Harlan of his own father. Joseph Boone had been a stern man, a military man, tall and lean, his face like a stone cliff, rarely smiling, always watching. He'd taught Harlan discipline with a whistle and a slap of a belt, but he'd also taught him structure, order, the kind of resilience that doesn't crumble easily even when the world tries to break you. Harlan had hated him for most of his teenage years. Now, at 52, he heard the man's voice in his own when he told Ash to sit up straight, don't slump your chest like that. Clover was gentler, more hesitant, and Harlan never pushed her too far. He spoke to her with softer words, smaller gestures, like handling a bird with a bruised wing. But she watched Ash intently and followed where he led. By the end of the first week, she could fetch, though she always returned things sideways, with a proud little hop in her gait. Harlan didn't correct it. He laughed. It was the first time in months. One night, parked in a rest area off a mountain ridge in northern Iowa, Harlan sat in the driver's seat staring out at the dark. His fingers hovered over the old CB radio for a long moment before he flipped it on. "Breaker 19, he said, voice scratchy from disuse. "This is Iron Wolf rolling south. Anyone out there tonight?" A long pause, then static. Then, "Well, I'll be damned." "Is that Boone?" Harlan blinked, a slow smile creeping onto his face. "Randy," he said, "you still breathing?" The voice came back, familiar and easy. Randy Double-Tap McKee, a barrel-chested man in his 60s with a gravel laugh and a habit of eating sunflower seeds like they were air. Randy had been around for decades, a fixture on the CB airwaves and one of the few men who'd ever seen Harlan cry. "I thought you dropped off the map," Randy continued. "After the divorce, man, you disappeared." "Needed to," Harlan said. "I get it. Hell, I would have too. Heard about your girl. Emmy, right?" "Yeah, I don't know, with her mom. Somewhere in Nebraska now, I think." "You ever talk to her?" Harlan paused. His knuckles tapped the wheel once. "No." Why not? Harlan stared at his reflection in the side mirror. His eyes looked older than they used to, tired in a different way. Felt like I didn't deserve to, he finally said. Like maybe I left too much damage behind. Silence. Then Randy's voice, softer this time. Boone, listen. You're still here. That means there's still time to show up. I've seen a lot of men disappear from their kids' lives and never come back. But you've always been stubborn. That's your ticket. Use it. Harlan didn't respond, but he didn't turn the radio off either. They let the silence ride with them for a while. Anyway, Randy said, I'm hauling steel out of Omaha tomorrow. I'll be on Channel 9 if you need to talk. Thanks, Harlan said. Before bed, Harlan stepped out into the cold air and let Ash and Clover stretch their legs near the edge of the truck stop parking lot. The moon hung low above them, pale and indifferent. Clover hopped through a thin crust of snow, tail high, her limp barely noticeable now. Ash sniffed a fire hydrant like it held the answers to the universe. Back inside the cab, Harlan wrapped them in blankets and leaned his head back. Sleep came slow. Then the dream came again. The crash, twisting metal, screams, his own voice calling Emmy's name. But it wasn't real, not memory, just guilt reimagining itself again and again. In the dream, she turned away. In the dream, his truck burned. He woke with a jolt, sweat freezing on his chest. Moonlight painted silver streaks across the windshield. The clock read 3:22 a.m. Ash was standing on the console between the seats, staring directly at him. Hey, boy, Harlan whispered, voice shaking. Ash inched closer and placed his paw against Harlan's leg. It wasn't much, but it was grounding. I'm okay, Harlan said, more for himself. Ash didn't move. Harlan sighed and reached for him. Ash climbed into the front seat without protest, curling into the space beside Harlan's thigh. Clover stirred in the back, then resettled. That night, Harlan didn't sleep much more, but he didn't feel alone either. The road the next day was smoother, the sun riding low behind the clouds. They passed through small towns and gas stations, through stretches of flat land where cattle stood in frozen fields, steam rising from their breath. Harlan caught himself humming once, just a fragment of an old tune, not enough to remember, but enough to mean something was healing, even if it still hurt. The sky over Idaho was a dull pewter when Harlan Boone eased his truck off the highway and onto the gravel shoulder of an old filling station that looked like it had been built when fuel was sold by the gallon, not the dream. The sign above the pump swung on rusted chains, its faded letters barely readable now. Mitchum's Gas, Grub, Good Folks. Harlan had once known this place like the back of his hand, when the paint was fresh and the coffee inside was always burning. It had been nearly 16 years since he last stopped here. Back then, it wasn't just a gas station. It had been a ritual. He and Lorraine, his ex-wife, used to drive up this way during summers when the roads were long and the conversations were longer. They would stop at Mitchum's for sodas and bad pie, park under the big oak near the dumpsters, and kiss like teenagers until the crickets started singing. Now, it just looked like a place time forgot. Ash and Clover stirred in the back seat. Clover gave a soft whine, her legs still bandaged, but nearly healed. Ash sat upright, his eyes scanning the lot as though assessing it for threats. Harlan reached over and gave his ear a scratch. You remember this place? He murmured. Yeah, me neither. He stepped out, boots crunching over salt-stained gravel. The air smelled like pine and diesel and the ghosts of happier days. Inside the station, a little bell rang as the door opened. The place hadn't changed much. Same cracked linoleum. Same gumball machine in the corner. The counter was cluttered with lotto tickets, beef jerky, and 2 jars labeled Honey Taffy and Regret. The radio buzzed softly with old country. There were only 2 customers, a tall man in camo buying chewing tobacco and a woman near the back aisle with a shock of white blonde hair tucked under a red knit cap. She turned. Her eyes widened. Harlan Boone, she said, voice climbing with disbelief. Well, hell, I thought you were a ghost by now. He blinked, took a step closer. Meg? Meg Raines had aged, but gracefully. The sharpness in her cheekbones remained, her blue eyes still bright despite the fine web of crow's feet at the corners. She was tall, slender, wrapped in a tan puffer jacket that looked like it had seen 3 Idaho winters too many. Her jeans were patched at the knee, and she held a basket of trail mix and instant coffee like someone used to long drives and longer silences. Harlan managed a smile. "You look exactly the same." She raised an eyebrow. "Liar, but charming." They hugged, a quick surprise thing full of disbelief and unspoken questions. "Lorraine said you'd fallen off the grid," Meg said after a beat. "Figured you were somewhere in Montana building a cabin or living with bears." "I almost did," Harlan said. "Then I found some reasons not to." He gestured outside. "I've got company now. A couple of dogs." "Show me." Outside, Ash immediately perked up. Clover wagged her tail with cautious rhythm. Meg leaned into the cab, her face softening. "Oh," she whispered. "Golden retrievers?" "Found them half dead in a snowstorm near the Minnesota border. Vet says they were probably dumped by a breeder running a scam." Meg reached in and stroked Ash's head. He didn't flinch. She looked impressed. "They trust you." "I don't know why," Harlan said, half smiling. Meg stepped back, her expression shifting. More serious now. "She misses you, you know." Harlan looked up, his breath stalling in his chest. "Emmy?" Meg nodded. "I saw Lorraine a few months back. Emmy still talks about you. She's 15 now, tall, braces, paints her nails black. But she still keeps a picture of you in her journal. She's written letters, too. Said she doesn't know where to send them." Harlan swallowed hard. The air suddenly felt thicker. "I didn't think she'd want to hear from me." Meg gave him a look. Not judgment, just fact. "You don't stop being a father because you're afraid, Harlan. She's waiting. She's been waiting." He opened his mouth to reply, but nothing came out. Just the sound of tires rolling over gravel in the distance and a gust of wind rattling the station's tin roof. Inside the store, the man in camo had started filming Ash and Clover through the windshield with his phone. "Hey," Harlan said, walking toward him. "It's cool, man." The guy grinned. "They're amazing. I've never seen dogs that calm in a truck cab." "They've been through a lot," Harlan said, tone cautious but not cold. "I run a little animal rescue blog," the man explained. "People love stuff like this. Mind if I post it?" Harlan hesitated, then shrugged. "Go ahead." The man smiled, typed something quickly, and hit upload. By the time Harlan returned to his truck, Meg was slipping her number onto a folded napkin. "I'm in Ketchum most weeks, teaching art to fifth graders, believe it or not." He accepted the note, eyes lingering on her handwriting, still the same looping script from the wedding card she'd given him and Lorraine all those years ago. "I'll call," he said. "You'd better," she replied, "and think about Emmy." He nodded, slower this time. "Yeah, I will." They said goodbye like people who knew better than to say, "See you soon." And Harlan pulled away from Mitchum's, the station shrinking in the mirror until it was just a square of rust and light. Ash pawed at the console, looking up. "I know," Harlan murmured. "I wasn't ready for that either." That night, parked under a blanket of stars outside a diner in eastern Oregon, Harlan leaned back in his seat and turned on his old phone. He scrolled through his gallery, past dozens of shots of the pup sleeping, playing, licking his boots. Then he opened his messages, typed, "Hey, this is Dad. Just wanted to say I'm out here, thinking about you." He didn't send it. Not yet. The next morning, a waitress in a pink apron and big glasses brought coffee to his table, while Ash and Clover waited outside the window. "You the trucker with the dogs?" she asked. "Yeah." "Someone posted a clip online last night. It's already hit 50,000 views." Harlan raised an eyebrow. "Really?" She nodded, excited. "People are calling them the snowstorm survivors. You should read the comments. Everyone's asking who you are." He looked out at Ash and Clover. Still survivors, still his. And maybe, just maybe, not the only ones getting found again. The gas station in eastern Oregon was nothing special. A dusty two-pump spot with sun-faded ads peeling from the windows and a rack of stale donuts sitting uneaten behind glass. But somehow, it had become the most surreal place Harlan Boone had found himself in a long while. That morning, as the wind carried the scent of diesel and pine through the air, he sat on the hood of his truck with a cup of coffee in hand and watched strangers walk up to his cab. Not for gas, not for directions, but to see the dogs. Ash and Clover. By now, the video had hit over 200,000 views. Someone had taken a minute-long clip, Ash sitting calmly in the front seat, Clover resting her chin on the dashboard, and paired it with a soft acoustic song and a caption that read, "From near death in the snow to riding beside a hero. Don't scroll without saying hello to Ash and Clover." That was all it took. Overnight, Harlan's quiet life had become a curiosity. "Are you the guy with the Goldens?" asked a woman in her 50s, wearing a quilted jacket and holding a latte in one hand and her phone in the other. "I might be," Harlan replied cautiously. "I watched the video like 10 times last night," she said, beaming. "They're beautiful. And you're a trucker, right? They say you rescued them in a blizzard." "Something like that." People kept stopping by. A local reporter from the small town of Shaniko tried to get a quote. A young couple traveling north asked for a photo. And then came the email. The woman at the counter, her name was Desiree, a petite, no-nonsense redhead in her late 40s, printed it for him after he admitted he didn't check his inbox much. She ran the station with her brother, both of them raised in the town, and committed to staying even as businesses left. She handed Harlan a wrinkled sheet of printer paper. "It came through the station's general account," she said, "but it's addressed to you, some rescue group out of Portland." Harlan took it and unfolded the page. The logo at the top showed a paw print cradled by a heart. Northwest Paws Coalition Outreach Department. The message was short but sincere. "Dear Mr. Boone, we've been deeply moved by your story and the journey of Ash and Clover. Our team at Northwest Paws Coalition would be honored to speak with you for a video interview to help raise awareness about rescue efforts and promote humane practices across state lines. Your experience has inspired many of our volunteers. We hope you'll consider sharing it with more people. With gratitude, Lori Hernandez, Outreach Director." Harlan stared at the letter for a long moment, the words echoing in his chest like distant footsteps. He folded it and tucked it into his jacket pocket. He didn't say yes, but he didn't throw it away either. That night, parked just off the Columbia River in a quiet turnout reserved for long-haul rigs, Harlan pulled the old shoebox from beneath his passenger seat. Inside was a worn, battery-powered cassette recorder. He'd found it in a second-hand shop months ago. Something about the weight of it had felt comforting. He hadn't used it until now. He pressed record. "Hey, Em," he began, his voice quieter than usual. "I know you probably don't want to hear from me. Or maybe you do. I don't know anymore." Ash stirred in the back, climbing over a pile of blankets and curling at Harlan's feet. Clover was tucked beside the heater, her small body wrapped in an old Army surplus coat. "But I've been thinking about you, a lot. And I guess I want you to know I didn't forget. I've made mistakes, big ones. But I'm trying to be better. I don't know if it's enough. It probably isn't. But I've got these 2 dogs now, Ash and Clover. They don't let me give up. I think maybe that's what you used to do too, before I got too tired to see it." He paused. The cassette wheel turned slowly, filling the silence. "I saw Meg. She said you wrote letters, that you kept a picture. I don't know what that means, but it matters to me. You matter to me. You always did." He clicked the recorder off. Didn't play it back. Just let it sit. The next morning, a package arrived at a truck stop near Pendleton. It was small, wrapped in brown paper, with Lena Moriarty's name written in bold, looping handwriting across the front. Inside was a letter and a photograph. The photo showed a piece of land. Muddy, grassy, nothing extraordinary, behind the Fernbrook Clinic. But in the foreground stood a wooden sign, hand-painted, Ash and Clover Sanctuary. Because every life deserves a second chance. The letter was handwritten, simple, honest. "Harlan, they inspired me more than I thought possible. I had the land already, just needed a reason. Now I've got one. I'm staying in Fernbrook, starting a rescue of my own. It's going to be small at first, but maybe it grows, like them, like us. Thank you for not giving up on them. And thank you for showing me that even the coldest nights end eventually. Lena." He read the letter twice, then folded it with the same care one might use for a flag or a memory that no longer hurts. At a rest area later that evening, Harlan sat on a picnic bench with Ash sitting tall beside him. Clover sprawled in the grass with her belly to the sky. A little boy approached, clutching a juice box, wide-eyed and hesitant. "Can I pet them?" he asked, looking to Harlan for permission. Harlan nodded. "Gently." Ash lowered his head, inviting the touch. Clover rolled upright and sniffed the boy's fingers before wagging gently. "They're rescue dogs," the boy's mother explained, walking over. "We saw them on Facebook. My sister works at a shelter." Harlan smiled faintly. Yeah, they rescued me too. The woman laughed. I think that's usually how it works. That night, as the sun melted into the edge of the world and the clouds turned the color of old postcards, Harlan sat in the quiet and pulled out the cassette recorder again. He didn't press record this time, just held it in his hand, thumb resting over the worn red button. Maybe tomorrow. Maybe tomorrow he'd send one. The city of Lincoln, Nebraska, unfolded like a puzzle of contradictions. Glass buildings beside aging brick houses, tidy lawns that ended abruptly in cracked sidewalks. The rhythm of traffic hummed steadily beneath gray skies. Harlan Boone hadn't been in a city this size in years, and it showed. He hunched slightly behind the wheel of his truck, eyes scanning street signs like they might suddenly vanish. His palms were sweaty. His heartbeat felt too fast. Ash lay curled in the front passenger seat, head on the armrest, sensing his unease. Clover sat upright in the back, her eyes watching the world whip by through the window. Her leg was almost healed now. She limped only when cold set in, but she was still the quieter of the two, more cautious. But today, something was different. Her posture was alert, tense. Harlan turned onto a residential street just blocks from the address Meg had given him, a small duplex where Lorraine had moved after the divorce. The school was nearby, and Emmy would be there until 3. He checked the clock. 2:46 p.m. He parked a block away, not wanting to look like a man who'd been planning this for weeks. Though, in truth, he'd been planning it far longer. The cassette recordings he never sent, the letters he never wrote. Now, finally, here he was. And he was terrified. As he stepped out of the truck, Ash followed, tail wagging gently. Clover lingered, ears twitching. The street was quiet except for a few passing cars and the sound of leaves skittering along the sidewalk. A movement across the road caught Harlan's eye, something small, orange, and fast. A cat, a young calico, darting across the street, just as a delivery van turned the corner. Clover saw it too. Before Harlan could react, she leapt from the open truck door and sprinted into the street. "Clover!" The brakes screamed, the van swerved, time bent. The van stopped inches from the cat. Clover collided with the curb instead, letting out a yelp as she tumbled and rolled onto the grass. Harlan ran to her, heart in his throat. She was already trying to stand. Ash barked, frantic. A middle-aged man in the van jumped out, pale and shaken. "She okay? I didn't even see her until—" "She'll be all right," Harlan muttered, crouching to check her legs. Clover whimpered, but the bones held. Just a scrape above her paw. Blood, but not deep. Still, Harlan scooped her into his arms like she was made of glass. Of course this would happen today. Of course. Sirens blared in the distance, growing closer. What happened next wasn't exactly clear. A bystander had called the police, reporting a man screaming and dogs running in traffic. Harlan didn't look like a local. His truck had out-of-state plates. And when the cruiser pulled up, all the old rules of suspicion and protocol snapped into place. He was ordered to stay put, asked to present ID. When he said he was trying to find his daughter at the nearby school, things got more complicated. A second officer arrived. Voices rose. Ash growled low, protective. Clover whimpered in his arms, head pressed to Harlan's chest. A female officer with cropped hair and mirrored sunglasses stepped forward. Her name tag read, Officer D. Selleck. She was tall, muscular, built like she lifted weights in the morning and didn't flinch in the face of noise. But her voice was calm. "Sir, do you have proof of your relationship to the child?" Harlan's throat was dry. "No, but her name is Emmy Boone. She's my daughter. I haven't seen her in years, but Let's not do this on the curb," she said gently, though her eyes were hard. "We'll need to verify custody, you understand?" They were preparing to bring him in. That's when Meg arrived. She drove a dented Honda Civic that coughed when it parked, and she stepped out of it like she'd been summoned by the weight of Harlan's unraveling. "Wait!" she shouted, waving her arms. Officer Selleck turned. Meg jogged over, breathless but composed. "This man isn't a threat. I called him here. I know Emmy. I was her godmother." There were questions, a tense 10-minute shuffle of phone calls and paperwork. Eventually, Selleck backed off. She crouched beside Clover, rubbing her head. "You've got brave dogs," she said. "But next time, let's try to use a leash, huh?" Harlan nodded, ashamed. "Yes, ma'am." Meg leaned close. "Come with me. She's still in school, but I have an idea." They didn't go to the house. They went to the park across from the school, the same park where Emmy used to feed ducks as a child. Meg made a quick call to Lorraine, brief and cautious. "She knows you're here," Meg said as she ended the call, and she didn't say no. That was enough. They sat on a bench beside the jungle gym, Ash curled at Harlan's feet. Clover, bandaged again, lay stretched in a patch of sun, her eyes fluttering closed. When the school bell rang, Harlan's breath caught in his chest. Children streamed through the gates, backpacks bouncing, laughter echoing across the lot. Then he saw her, Emmy, 15 now, taller than he remembered, long brown hair pulled into a messy ponytail. She wore a black hoodie with chipped nail polish and a tiredness in her eyes that mirrored his own. She spotted Meg first, then Ash, then him. Her steps slowed. Ash stood, tail wagging gently, and then it happened. Ash walked over and sat in front of her. Just sat. Emmy looked down. And for the first time in what felt like centuries, she smiled. Just a little, just enough. Then she crouched and hugged Ash, burying her face in his fur. Harlan didn't move. He couldn't. She looked up at him, and he said nothing. He just opened his arms, and Emmy, his daughter, stepped into them. Not fully, not fast, but enough. Later, as they walked to Meg's car, Emmy beside him with one hand resting on Ash's back, she asked, "What's her name?" "Clover," Harlan said. "She saved that cat." "Yeah, she's limping." "She's a fighter. So am I," Emmy said quietly. And in that moment, under the broken sun and the smell of fallen leaves, Harlan knew something was mending. Not perfectly, not all at once, but truly. The weekend began beneath a soft, overcast sky, the kind that promised rain but never delivered, just a cool, constant hush over Lincoln's sleepy streets. Emmy Boone stood beside her father's truck, her hands tucked into the front pocket of her hoodie, a hesitant smile tugging at the corners of her mouth, as Clover nuzzled her knee. Ash stood alert beside her like a sentinel, his golden coat gleaming with morning dew, tail swishing in calm, even arcs. Harlan watched them from the driver's side, a cooler full of peanut butter sandwiches, dog treats, and bottled water sitting in the back. It wasn't much of a plan, just a drive, some open space, a walking trail Meg had recommended. But for a man who had spent the last few years circling the country in silence, it felt like the first day of a new life. "You sure you're okay with this?" he asked. Emmy shrugged in that teenage way that tried to say, "I don't care," but meant, "I'm nervous too." She glanced at the dogs, then up at him. "They seem to like me," she said. "They don't like just anyone." She gave him a sideways glance. "Neither do I." They drove out past the city limits toward a place called Ridge Hollow Park, a stretch of woods and trails dotted with old stone fire pits and wooden benches carved with names and hearts faded by time. Emmy sat in the passenger seat, her hand resting on Ash's neck, fingers occasionally curling in his fur. "You named him Ash," she said after a while. "Yeah. Because of fire or because he's quiet?" "Both," Harlan said. She nodded thoughtfully. "And Clover?" "Because she's hope." That earned him a look. Not mocking, not quite amused, just surprised. "You don't sound like a trucker." "I haven't been feeling much like one lately." They spent the day walking the trails, throwing sticks for Ash, watching Clover limp behind proudly with a determined trot. Emmy laughed, a short, cautious sound, the first time Ash leapt into the creek and returned with a branch twice his size. "I miss this," she said later, as they sat on a fallen log eating sandwiches. "I missed being with someone who lets the silence be okay." Harlan chewed slowly, watching her through the mist of late afternoon sun. "I didn't mean to disappear," he said. "I didn't know how to fix things after I broke them." "You could have tried." "I know," he said. "And I should have. I should have called. Should have written. Should have said I was sorry." There was a pause. Emmy looked at her sandwich, then at Clover, who had curled at her feet. "I used to talk to your picture, you know," she said, "when Mom wasn't around. I wrote you letters, but I didn't know where to send them. I thought maybe you were in Alaska or dead or something." Harlan's throat tightened. "I wasn't far, just frozen." "Yeah," she whispered. "Me too." They didn't say much after that, but it was enough. That night, Emmy stayed over with Meg, still her art teacher, still the grounding adult when Lorraine felt far away. Meg's guest room was filled with paints and brushes and unfinished landscapes leaning against the wall. Emmy curled up in a sleeping bag with Ash beside her and Clover guarding the door. And for the first time in months, she slept through the night. The next morning, as fog rolled off the roofs like breath, Harlan checked his phone and found a message. It was from Lena. "We're opening the sanctuary next weekend. I want you to come. Bring the dogs. And Emmy, if she wants to come too. I've got something I want to show you." The message came with a photo, fresh wooden fencing, a new barn painted white with green trim, and a hand-carved sign above the entrance that read, "Ash and Clover Sanctuary." There were already animals in the paddocks, a goat, 2 sheep, and 3 rescue pups, chasing one another in wild, blurry joy. Harlan showed Emmy the message. "She wants us to come?" "She does." Emmy looked at him. "You going?" "I think so." She nodded. "I'll come too." The drive back to Fernbrook took a day and a half. They stopped in a tiny town for gas, where a boy recognized Ash from the video and offered him a half-eaten corn dog. Harlan signed an old receipt as an autograph, mostly as a joke, and Emmy laughed hard enough to snort. By the time they reached the edge of Fernbrook, the clouds had lifted, and sunlight poured over the town like a benediction. The sanctuary sat at the end of a gravel road just outside the clinic where it all began. The land stretched back into gentle hills, dotted with trees and wide, open sky. A small gathering was already underway. Volunteers, town residents, and a few reporters from local papers milled around the front gate, sipping cider and petting dogs. Lena stood near the barn in a denim shirt and leather boots, clipboard in one hand, a walkie-talkie in the other. Her hair was tied back with a red scarf, and she had never looked more in her element. She saw Harlan and walked over, her face breaking into a smile. "You made it. Wouldn't miss it." She crouched to greet Ash and Clover, whispering their names like they were sacred. Then she stood and looked at Emmy. "And this must be—" "Emmy," she said, stepping forward. "I'm Lena," she replied, extending a hand. "I've heard a lot about you." "All true," Emmy said with a half grin. Lena led them around the sanctuary, showed them the kennels, the feeding area, the small therapy building in progress. Then she stopped by a shed, opened the door, and motioned Harlan inside. There, on a workbench, sat a clipboard with a list of names. Caretaker, Harlan Boone; volunteer trainer, Emmy Boone; trainee. "You're offering me a job?" he asked. "I'm offering you a purpose," she said, "and a place, if you want it." He looked around. At the fence Ash had once leaned against, at the yard where Clover had learned to walk again, at his daughter, now talking with 2 other girls, holding a leash, laughing. He took the clipboard. "I think I do." He didn't return to the truck that night. He slept in the caretaker's cabin with Ash on the rug and Clover by the fire. Emmy stayed in the volunteer bunkhouse, helping sort bedding and supplies. And in the distance, the wind moved through the trees, carrying with it the scent of hay, pine, and second chances. Harlan lay on his back, eyes open in the dark, heart full for the first time in years. He had chosen this. Not because he had nowhere else to go, but because this was the first time he'd been exactly where he was supposed to be. The first snow of the season arrived softly, blanketing the fields of Fernbrook in slow, deliberate silence. It crept over fences, rested on rooftops, and dusted the worn wooden sign at the entrance of the sanctuary. Ash and Clover Sanctuary, where second chances begin, until each carved letter shimmered under a layer of white like something sacred. Inside the main barn, warm light spilled across hay bales turned into makeshift benches, rows of folding chairs, and tables lined with thermoses of cider and cinnamon cookies. The place was alive with voices. Children in bright scarves, volunteers in green vests, and dogs, so many dogs, wagging tails and trotting between guests like hosts at a family reunion. At the center of it all stood Harlan Boone, now in a brown wool coat and thick work gloves, with a trimmed beard and a gentler expression carved into his features. He looked older, but not worn. Firmer, more grounded. The kind of man who had stopped drifting and planted roots in the frost-hardened soil of a life he had rebuilt, plank by plank. Clover sat beside him, her once fragile leg now strong, though she still walked with a slight bounce, her signature limp. She wore a red vest with white stitching that read, "Therapy Dog. Hug me, I'm here for you." Ash stood near a group of children seated in a circle. One of the boys, no older than 8, was crying silently, rocking gently in place. Ash moved forward slowly, lay down in front of him, and nudged the boy's knee with his snout. The boy didn't move. Then he reached out, hesitant, touched the fur, then buried his face in it. Ash didn't flinch, just stayed. A therapist named Sarah Nguyen watched closely. She was in her early 40s, petite and sharp-eyed, with jet black hair tied into a low bun. A quiet force of calm, she had once worked in an inner-city youth shelter and had moved to Fernbrook the summer prior after a personal loss, a miscarriage that had broken her voice but not her resolve. "This dog," she said to Harlan as she approached, nodding toward Ash, "he knows things, not just cues, people things." Harlan smiled. "He's been through it." "So have you." He looked at her. "We all have. Some of us just walk it on 4 legs." Laughter rippled from the corner, where volunteers were lighting candles in mason jars. Tonight marked the 1-year anniversary of the sanctuary's founding, a milestone no one had believed possible, least of all Harlan himself. Emmy stood near the podium at the front of the barn, holding a folded sheet of paper in both hands. 16 now, she had grown taller, her hair longer, her voice steadier. She wore a forest green scarf and boots caked with snow, and around her neck hung a silver pendant, Lena's gift on her birthday, engraved with 3 small paw prints. Harlan's heart stirred as he looked at her. She was no longer the silent, hurt child who wouldn't meet his eyes. She was becoming someone fierce, capable, and compassionate. She stepped up to the mic. The room quieted. "I didn't really know how to start this," Emmy began, her voice unsure for a moment. "So I'll just say what I remember." She looked at Ash and Clover, then at her father. "I remember being 13 and not understanding why people leave. I remember crying into a pillow because I thought my dad had forgotten me. And I remember writing letters I never sent. Then, one day, I met 2 dogs who had also been left behind. They didn't ask questions, they just stayed." A pause. "I think sometimes we expect the people we love to fix everything, but sometimes they're just trying not to break again. My dad didn't come back perfect, but he came back real, and he listened. Not always with words, but with his heart." She unfolded the last part of the paper. "I want to thank the dogs who saved us. Ash for being a protector. Clover for showing us how to keep walking. And I want to thank my dad for not giving up." A beat, then applause. Not thunderous, gentle, like the first crack of morning light through a frost-covered window. After the ceremony, Harlan stood by the fence watching the snowfall return. The sky had turned to slate, and the wind whispered through the trees at the edge of the field. He felt someone step beside him. It was Lena. She wore a navy coat and had her hands stuffed into wool mittens. Her breath came in soft clouds. "Snow's back," she said. "Always is," Harlan replied. "You all right?" He nodded. "I'm not where I thought I'd be at this age, but I think I'm exactly where I need to be." She looked at him. "You're happy?" "I'm still learning how to be," he said. "But yeah, I think so." Ash padded over and leaned into Harlan's leg. Clover followed, licking snowflakes from Lena's boot. Lena knelt beside Clover and smiled. "Do you ever think about that night when you brought them in? Every day? And I still don't know what made me stop that truck." "I do," she said. "You hadn't given up yet." "Not really." Emmy called to them from the barn doorway. "Come on, they're lighting the fire pit." Harlan turned to Lena. "You go ahead, I'll be there in a minute." She nodded and walked back with the dogs, their shadows stretching across the snow. Harlan stayed. Let the cold bite his cheeks, let the quiet sit with him. And he remembered the first night, the storm, the barbed wire, the still bodies in his arms. So much had changed. But one thing hadn't. The snow still fell, but now no one was left alone in it. No one forgotten. No one buried beneath it without a hand reaching through. Under the snow, the ground had frozen. But in the cracks, something had bloomed. A heart, a family, a home. And far in the distance, a child's laughter rose into the night air. Steady, bright, and alive. Just like them. Sometimes miracles don't come with thunder or blinding light. Sometimes they arrive wrapped in fur, shivering under the snow, waiting for someone to stop and see them. Harlan didn't find Ash and Clover by chance. No, He was sent. And maybe, just maybe, those little lives were sent to him too. Because when the world feels cold and we feel forgotten, God often speaks not through words, but through love, through second chances, through small hearts that refuse to give up. In a world full of noise, may we listen with our hearts, like Harlan did. If this story touched you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who might be walking through a winter of their own. Leave a comment below. Tell us your story. And subscribe for more tales that prove love can bloom even beneath the snow. May the Lord bless you, keep you warm in spirit, and send you your own ash and clover, just when you need them most.